Right. Hi, everybody. In case you are worried that you are in the wrong room, this is the Bright Blue event done in partnership with the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition titled Fighting Economic Crime, Cleaning Up the UK's Dirty Money Problem. And just to let you know a little bit about Bright Blue and the UK ACC. So Bright Blue is a liberal conservative think tank for the preservation and improvement of liberal society. Our four research themes are social policy, economics, education, and energy and environment. And this is actually one in a series of events we've done together with the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition. I believe it's the third one. So if you find this very interesting, if this is an area you're interested in, actually all of those past events are on our YouTube channel. So you can go onto it and you can watch those past events and you can see how the debate has developed and whether some of the speakers here have managed to improve their arguments. You can also tweet about this event. Hashtag Bright Blue, and I would ask you that you follow Bright Blue at We Are Bright Blue on Twitter, or X, as it is called nowadays. If you're watching this on a live stream, this event is being live streamed. It's being live streamed on our YouTube. You can submit questions as well. We will prioritize questions from the room once it comes to the questions. But you can submit questions on Slido, and the link for the Slido you will be able to find underneath the video. Okay, so without further ado, allow me to introduce the speakers. Going from my left, there is the Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell, MP. He is the Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs. To his right, but still to my left, is Maria Nizzero, Dr. Maria Nizzero. She is a Finance and Security Research Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, which you probably know as RUSI. Then to my immediate right is the Right Honourable Sir David Davis MP. He is the former Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, as well as many other much esteemed positions. And then to his right is James Bolton Jones, who is the Advocacy Advisor for Spotlight on Corruption. And we will begin, I think, with. We'll begin. Well, we'll stick to the schedule. We'll begin with David, since David is meant to speak first. And David is, besides what I've just said, he was also the chief negotiator for our nation in the Brexit negotiations. Many years ago, he was the chairman of the Conservative Party. He's a champion of civil liberties, and he is a critic of the illusory pursuit of an unobtainable security. So a very relevant topic when it comes to corruption and dirty money. David, since you are a representative of the opposition, but also of the previous government, what do you think the previous government's performance has been in this area? After we've had 2 economic crime acts, an economic crime plan in 2019 and an anti-corruption strategy. What have been the results for the UK's economy? Do you think it's been successful?
Well, I think Mr. Sunak will be horrified to think that I was his representative. Probably Andrew's nearer to that than me. Well, it's not been hugely successful, to be frank. But there was a meeting, a bit like this one at the Labour Party conference, in which Doughty, the relevant minister, blamed everything on the previous Conservative government. So I thought, actually, why don't we look for somebody impartial on this, right? And the nearest I could, and well informed, both things are sometimes rare in politics. And I looked and found a reference to the generic problem of corruption in London, with a specific interest in the Russian element to it, by the Independent Security Committee of the House of Commons. People who are inside the security cordon, and so are able to make, they can't tell you what the secrets, but they can make their judgments on the basis of very accurate information. And I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs from it, because it's really interesting. It says, it's widely recognised that the key to London's appeal to Russian oligarchs was the exploitation of the UK's investor visa scheme, introduced in 1994. It's not that new. followed by the promotion of a light and limited touch to regulation, with London's strong capital and housing markets offering sound investment opportunities. The UK's rule of law and judicial system were also seen as a draw. The UK welcomed Russian money, and few questions, if any, were asked about the provenance of this considerable wealth. It appears the UK government at the time held the belief, more perhaps in hope than expectation, that developing links with major Russian companies will promote good governance by the encouraging ethical and transparent practices and the adoption of a law-based commercial environment. Well, forgive me smiling. What is now clear is it was in fact counterproductive, in that it offered ideal mechanisms by which illicit finance could be recycled through what has now been referred to as a London laundromat. The money was also invested in extending patronage and building influence across a wide sphere of British establishment. PR firms, charities, political interests, academia, and cultural institutions were all willing beneficiaries of Russian money, contributing to a reputation laundering process. It's not just the oligarchs either. The arrival of Russian money resulted in a growth industry of enablers, individuals and organisations who manage and lobby for the Russian elite in the UK. Lawyers, accountants, estate agents, PR professionals have all played a role, wittingly or unwittingly, in the extension of Russian influence, which is often linked to promoting the nefarious interests of the Russian state. A large private security industry has developed in the UK to service the needs of the Russian elite, in which British companies protect the oligarchs and their families, seek compromat, blackmail, on competitors, and on occasion help launder money through offshore shell companies and fabricate due diligence reports while lawyers protect them too. Now, that's about the Russians, but it's not just about the Russians, because you could also pick a whole number of other originating countries, China, some other Asian countries, some other Middle Eastern countries, from which huge wealth comes. And this is the first part of the problem, that the Act was passed in 1994, no doubt with good intentions, but as time came along and more money poured into London, the Treasury got something of an interest in this, because this raises money, it raises taxes, it increases the growth of the economy. From one point of view, it's all good. Not from the point of view of the people whom the money's been stolen, nor from the point of view of people who are not paying taxes anymore, because we are also, through our overseas territories, something of a hub for a whole load of, well, certainly tax avoidance, maybe tax evasion. It's really, really hard to know which is which these days, because we don't differentiate properly between them. So to come back to your question, there was a 2019-2022 strategy, which I think the relevant minister, I think it was John Glenn, claimed that we'd hit 49 out of 52 targets. I think Rusi estimated about half that. I mean, I'm summarising, it's more complicated than that. The truth is, this is hard to get a grip on. It really is hard to get a grip on. Why? Because of that point about creating a London industry. None of you will probably know, but I'm also a campaigner on something called SLAPS. This is strategic litigation of public participants. Basically, it's the way that Russians and others use our legal system and our PR system and our hacking system, illegal hacking systems, all available in London, to protect themselves and destroy their opponents. So they could come here, they could exploit all the freedoms of being in the London capital markets and London investment markets, and at the same time crush anybody who opposed them. The one and only one good outcome of the Ukraine war was we started this campaign 1 month before the latest round of Ukraine war started. We had 12 members of parliament turn up to listen to the debate. When we reran the debate 3 months later after the Ukraine war, we had 100 turn up. So it gives you a measure. And of course, the oligarchs have mostly been expelled, although I'm not entirely sure the sanctions have worked properly. So that's the history. The risk, the problem here, for Conservatives in particular, is that this started with a deregulation measure. Right? And it was an unwisely implemented deregulation measure. And what we have to do is find ways of making the City of London and London and Britain as an investment centre attractive without enabling dirty money by creating the mechanisms we have created and creating, therefore, the London laundromat. So the expulsion of many of the Russian oligarchs and oligarchs generally is now a first real step in the process, but we need to build on it by tightening up all the measures that were referred to in the ICC report. Good for a start?
That's very good, David. Thanks very much. Before we move on from you, I think most people in this room, maybe actually not in this room, but most people in this at this conference will associate you chiefly with your role in our exit from the European Union. And I wonder, what do you think the effect of that has been on our ability to tackle Russian money? Of course, this attempt to combat Russian influence has been a European-wide one. Do you think cooperation with Europe in order to tackle Russian money has been made more difficult by Brexit?
You're really the German minister sitting here to tell you how good Europe is at resisting Russian influence, frankly. Forgive me, but we're better at it than most of the Europeans are. And we've actually got more freedom to do it now than we had before. So actually we didn't do a great job, frankly. That's why I resigned on the replacement of European regulations. But now we can, which we couldn't before. And European regulations are completely compromised on this.
Thanks very much, David. I wonder what James has to say on this. I wonder what James has to say on what David has just said. Do you agree with this assessment? Do you think the government could have? Well, actually, I was going to say, could the government have done better? It's not like David was extremely praiseworthy towards the government, has he? What more could be done?
Yeah, so I think David's given a fantastic summary of the problem and how this has developed since effectively the 1990s and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the huge illicit capital flight from east to west, and about how the UK has become this very effective one-stop shop for those looking to launder their money if they've stolen it often from developing countries. Helped, as David highlighted, by these crack teams of enablers, be they estate agents, lawyers, accountants, financiers, etc. And I think this, although you David referenced, I think it was the ICC report, which was before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia.
Yeah, very much.
But I think this really crystallized in the wider public's consciousness around February 2022, when suddenly, it erupted into the news that all these Russians with links to Putin owned vast amounts of property in London and across the UK, and that really shocked people, I think. And it also shocked the then Conservative government, I think, which had been saying a lot of positive things about taking action in this area, and had taken some action. For example, we had the unexplained wealth orders and the Criminal Finances Act, which Andrew was of course involved in from the backbenches very effectively. But in sort of post-2022, we saw this flurry of new legislation. Two key bills in particular, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act last year, and then in 2022 we had the Economic Crime Transparency and Enforcement Act, which both did a great job of tightening a lot of the loopholes that we had. And we also had the Economic Crime Plan 2, which runs until 2026, though it's not quite clear if the new government is going to keep going with that or not. They haven't quite been clear on that yet. So there was a lot of really positive action, but as David alluded to, there is still a lot to do. Still plenty of major loopholes, and one quick kind of anecdote illustrates that, which I don't know if anyone saw a couple of weeks ago. Al Jazeera put out this fantastic investigative documentary detailing how a former land minister in Bangladesh had used a network of UK-based enablers to amass a property portfolio in the UK of about 350 properties worth about £200 million. His salary, for context, in 2022/2023 as a minister was about £10,000. So it's not totally clear how he managed to buy all this property, but the new government in Bangladesh is now investigating him for corruption, including illegal acquisition of funds and laundering those into the UK. So we'll have to see there. But clearly, the measures that we've taken so far weren't enough to prevent that happening and other examples of money laundering occurring. So I would probably focus on three things the government and the opposition can push the government to do from the backbenches, perhaps especially through the Conservative-held select committees and Home Affairs and Public Accounts. So number one, we really need to focus on enforcement. We've got pretty decent laws, especially with these new Economic Crime Acts. There are still a few loopholes that need to be tightened, but the really key vulnerability is in enforcement. Spotlight on Corruption had a report on the National Crime Agency out a couple of weeks ago, which found that what is supposed to be the UK's FBI is essentially on its knees. There are chronic recruitment and retention problems. They're hemorrhaging staff, and they're not able to fulfil the key role of combating serious and organised crime, which includes money laundering and corruption. It wouldn't cost a lot to make NCA pay scales the same as currently they're pegged to 90% of the police. So you're never going to get police wanting to join the NCA for the salary. At least they might join for the broader mission, but you're always going to take a pay cut joining the NCA from the police. So it would cost something like 24 million to equalise the pay structures and reform the pay structures. And for context, the NCA spent last year 16 million on consultants and temporary workers. Just because they can't do this recruitment, and get enough people in to do the job. So that would be number one. Number two, the regulation around money laundering is not enforced effectively enough in the UK, and the system for enforcing those regulations is ineffective. We have 22 different professional body supervisors supervising the legal and accountancy sectors. The average fine for these supervisors annually is about £3,000, which when you think about the NCA's figure that £100 billion worth approximately, the estimate is that is being laundered through the UK each year, it really pales in comparison.
We've taken back 1.8 billion out of several hundred billion, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, and this is something that colleagues at Transparency International have been doing a fantastic job pushing on, we need to close loopholes in our corporate structures that the previous government did a great job starting, but there are still ongoing loopholes, particularly around trusts. So there was a new register of overseas entities, which now requires foreign-owned companies to disclose their beneficial owner. The problem is you can now just hide who that is through having that company owned through a trust. So that needs to be sorted out. And then finally, and I'm sure Andrew will talk about this in his remarks, our Crown dependencies and overseas territories urgently need to establish an open, publicly accessible registers of beneficial ownership so that we can unearth and bring to light those companies behind whom we have the corruption, the kleptocrats hiding their identities and laundering money with impunity. So yeah, enforcement, AML regulation, corporate transparency. If we can focus on those three key elements, I think the UK can finally start to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Can I add one small point to James's point on the NCA, which is not just about money to pay the officers. One of the things we stumbled over really when we were doing the strategic litigation legislation was the fact that some of these oligarchs are actually suing police officers and intimidating police officers who are investigating them. So we have to basically take away that right from the oligarchs. Quite a difficult thing because you're cutting somebody's human rights, as it were, to stop them actually intimidating the police officers. So there's one element I'd add into that.
Fully agreed, yeah.
Very well. Strong case from James. Now moving on to my left, Maria. Do you have anything to well, yeah.
Yes.
Do you have anything to add on this?
No, I mean, James has already highlighted the key three things. I do agree. Enforcement, AML supervision, and corporate transparency are probably the key things that I would focus like in the next years. But I suppose that there is the way that I look at the way that the UK has reacted to everything that's happened over the past 2 years. I think I'm a little bit more positive in comparison to the remarks that have been said. It's true, we were not in the best place on earth, but for the past 2.5 years, we have seen major reforms, and that has changed not just in legislation. Yes, of course, legislation is very important, but it has also changed a little bit the sort of mentality and the approach that we have to the topic. Me at RUSI, I work for the Center for Finance and Security, which up until very recently, sometimes I still had to make the case with my colleagues from the military science teams who are in the room actually, of why we were, at RUSI, because we were saying finance, illicit finance is a national security issue. You do not realize that by having all these loopholes, you're actually, allowing Russian oligarchs, Chinese state actors, terrorist financing. There are, security threats that are being enabled by allowing this dirty money to come up. So I think that, yes, legislation has been important, but also there has been a little bit more of a change of mindset in the way that we think of, if I talk about sanctions, now people are, hopefully, at least my parents are going to nod and say, oh, yeah, that thing. So that's great. But the story of the UK and dirty money for the past 20 years has been a story of reaction to a crisis after a crisis after a crisis. And I say this, and I invite you all to do a little game that I play sometimes, which is going on unanswered, actually, and searching for keywords. If you search for illicit finance, connected to, even just in whatever parliamentary debate, but also connected to security, key dates will appear, and they were February 2022. It's going to be the 2018, since we're in the Russia report. It's going to be 2015, back at the peak of ISIS. So it's always when something happens, which means that if we don't have a crisis, or a crisis is slowly building, like, for instance, the one of China, we risk of getting there too late. So it's important, yes, obviously, to pass all the legislation that we have, but I think that it's, we have all this system, this ecosystem that we have created now. As James rightly so has pointed out, we need to enforce everything that we have just managed to pass for the past 2 years. And the economic crime plan has been cited a couple of times. For those of you who do not know, it's like this massive strategy, it's a whole of a systems response in theory, lots of actions that the UK, the different government departments are supposed to, implement to tackle the dirty money problem. It's true, the first economic crime plan at RUSI, we estimated that about less than actually 40% of the actions had been completed. If you look at it now, because I still track it in my spare time, 60%, yeah, I don't have a life. But yeah, 60% of the actions have technically been completed. The problem is these are all outputs. So has a strategy come out? Yes. Has it been implemented? No. So rather than focusing on outputs, we should focus a little bit more on outcomes. So I would rather, to see one case, one slap case unsuccessful, or one asset recovery that finally goes well with an unexplained well thought that we finally seen it when, since 2017 that the Criminal Finances Act was passed, then we had the Economic Crime Act one actually. And now we finally had a little bit of reform and the UWOs have finally been used. I want to see those little actions here and there, that those are the ones that then get the ball rolling. So I'm not as negative, probably. I do agree that there are lots of things that we need to do, but we need to change the way that we look at the issue. And again, probably it's because I'm RUSI, but I see security as probably the easiest way to get the conversation and get politicians, the current government, but even international allies. We spoke about the European Union. If we're trying to get our allies to come on the same level, well, security is probably one of the easiest conversations that we can have right now. So let's just use all the points that we have. And I will stop here.
Picking up on that slightly, actually. David mentioned China earlier. And you said that we risk getting there too late. So should we be more on the front foot with China and maybe with other powers that we perhaps should be concerned about? Should we be seizing Chinese assets just as we seized Russian ones?
I mean, we do not seize Russian assets, so that's actually been
Okay.
that's a big problem. But I think that first of all we need to understand how Russia is using these economic levers. We do not understand it at all. The United States, I'm going to make an example, for instance, right now. Chinese professional money laundering organizations are considered one of the national security threats in the US. Why so? Because they're laundering money of drug cartels, and the fentanyl crisis right now in the US is killing more American citizens per year than all of the wars since 2011. Since 2001. So that is a national security issue. But is the work of Chinese professional money laundering organizations actually sanctioned by China? Is China actually behind it? We still don't know that. So we need first to understand the threat rather than just, go and seize all the Chinese assets, because that leads to unintended consequences. And once again, we should not be tying the issue to yet another problem. We need to have a little bit more of a whole of the system longer term. So we cannot move from Russia to China, because maybe next time it's going to be, I don't know, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, whatever it is. I picked randomly. just in case.
Yes, it's going to be Belgium.
Well, Luxembourg, whatever.
And next, but very much not least, a true heavyweight of British politics, the former Secretary of State for International Development, the former Chief Whip, the former Minister for Development, the former Deputy Foreign Secretary, a position that was created just for him. I was hoping that David would defend the previous government. He has not, so maybe Andrew will give a defense.
Fond hope, yeah.
Well, look, thank you very much indeed. It's great to see so many people here, and thank you to Bright Blue, which occupies a very important place in the right of centre firmament. And thank you also to Bartek for arranging and for chairing this meeting. I want to build on the comments which some of my colleagues here on the panel have done. I agree. I think there's what has been said here is absolutely right and very helpful. But I think it's worth just going back to basics for a moment and saying, how big is the problem and how much have we done about it? Now, some time ago, the National Crime Agency indicated that something like 40% of the dirty money all around the world was coming through UK or UK subsidiaries, by which I mean London, the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies. That's basically what we are talking about here. And we should be in no doubt what this money is. This is money from the drugs trade. It's money illegally acquired from the sex trade. It's money stolen from Africa and Africans by business people, corrupt politicians, corrupt warlords, bent politicians and so forth. And a lot of the debate that goes on in Britain is, we're such an attractive place that obviously we attract very bad people and we must do something about it. I'm afraid it's more fundamental than that. We have been a receptacle for dirty money that has welcomed dirty money for a very long time. Now, I pay a greater tribute, probably than others on the panel, to the work that the Tory government has done on this. It started, of course, with 2016 with the G8 summit in Britain led by David Cameron, where tackling dirty money was at the heart of it. And Britain then introduced open registers. But it's been a difficult journey. For example, part of this is you've got to have an effective policeman in Companies House. Companies House hasn't been a policeman at all. It's been a sort of library, really, and you can register for a company as Dr. Mickey Mouse, and no one would chase you up. So, and there's been movement on that now, and it's now not so much a library; it's more of a policeman, and that's a good thing. But hang on to that 40% figure, because although when I told the Foreign Office, they said it was difficult to stand it up, that was the figure that we were given before. And the reason why, having closed registers of beneficial ownership, which was the original tool, was not enough. Everyone thought that if you have closed registers and you gave access to law and enforcement agencies, and they promised to get back to you the answer within 24 hours, and if it was terrorism, within an hour or two, that giving the law enforcement agencies that insight would be enough. And then the Paradise and the Panama Papers were published, by brilliant journalism from The Guardian and the BBC, and the scales fell from our eyes because we understood that that closed register was a rifle shot into the information, and what you actually needed was to be able to see the dotted lines between different transactions. And at that point, we realized why open registers were absolutely essential, so that principally investigative journalists and NGOs and charities like Transparency International could pursue the dotted lines. And that is incredibly important, and it's been quite difficult for some of the Crown dependencies in the overseas territories to understand why that is so important. And remember that the baddies have the best tunes. They can employ the best lawyers. They can employ the best accountants. And it poses a very difficult dilemma for us, because do we say we'll hold the enablers to account? When I worked in the city, you had KYC, Know Your Client, you had a whole series of things which we all said did not hinder the good guys, did not hinder the bad guys, but actually hindered the good guys from carrying out their normal business. But the fact is that what the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers showed is you've got very sophisticated people who can carry out the necessary structural arrangements for dealing with this money. They are very well paid by the baddies. To what extent do you hold the enablers to account, the accountants in London, the lawyers and so forth, is ongoing business. Now, having discovered and worked out you had to have these open registers, David and I and Margaret Hodge and others in the House of Commons, when Theresa May was Prime Minister, had the upper hand because we could get a majority. And on one occasion, the government surrendered as the amendment was being made to introduce open registers in the overseas territories. And on another occasion, when we were about to get our way on the Crown dependencies, the government, uniquely in my memory, David, withdrew all the business of the day, just closed down the business for that particular Monday. This is the virtue of having a chief whip on your team. but subsequently, these things have not gone as fast as we would like. I did a deal with the First Minister of Guernsey at the Trafalgar House dinner at the East India Public Schoolboys Club over the port. He invited me to dinner to say, if you give us an extra year, we will surrender and we will implement these open registers. They've not done it. I have had difficult meetings with one only a week ago with the BVI, who are being very obdurate and are using the European Union. They are deliberately misinterpreting a judgment of the European Union to say that they don't have to do it. But on the other hand, the Cayman have completely come round, and these are the two key ones we need to do. But as far as the Crown dependencies are concerned, we're having very great difficulty. They are well connected. Whenever Davis or Mitchell or Hodge appear on the scene, the secretary to the governor rings up the palace and says, what's going on here? And they're proving much more obdurate, and they've gone back on the agreement that we believe was reached. So there is more work to be done. I very much hope that a cross-party, because it was Parliament, not the executive, it was Parliament that pushed this forward. I very much hope that during this Parliament, it will be possible for us to make clear that if you are a Crown dependency, if you are an overseas territory, if you want to share our king, our flag, our laws, our values, then you have to take a far more rigorous approach to handling this disgusting and dirty money and be far more transparent and open, because, as David Cameron said, it is sunlight which is the best disinfectant. Open up these registers to serious investigative journalists, proper NGOs like Transparency International. You will be able to join the dots, and you will be able to bear down significantly on this. And most of the arguments that are put up by those against are, in my view, fallacious. For example, they say, well, some of these overseas territories, they earn all their income through their financial transactions. If you take that away from them, they will be a cost on the development budget. But as actually the Cayman have shown, if you clean up your act, then the American banks will come there and will use you as a sort of platform for international financial transactions, and you make money that way. They also say, well, what's the point of us doing it when in reality the money will then go to, the business will go to other locations. But the truth is, getting your money into a British jurisdiction means you sleep well, because there is a proper system of law and justice. If you are denied putting your dirty money in there and you have to put it into Panama or the Dutch Antilles or somewhere, then you won't sleep so well, because you'll worry that some device will be worked out to take your ill-gotten gains off you. So this needs to be a comprehensive movement for sure. But we cannot allow that to be an excuse for Britain not taking responsibility for this enormous amount of money that is, we believe, trafficked through Britain, London, British to overseas territories and the Crown dependencies. We have to take action. We've made progress. The economic crime acts, which have been referred to, are a very good way station on the way. There is more to do, and I hope that David and I and our colleagues will be able to persuade the government. And Margaret Hodge is now in the Lords, so that's another aspect of this. I hope very much we'll be able to persuade the government, not just of the rightness of our cause, but it's Britain's reputation which has been damaged by this, and we need to put it right. Thank you very much.
Well, I thought it was encouragingly optimistic. I will stop abusing my chair privilege by asking questions immediately, because I'm conscious that Maria has to leave in a few minutes. So I want to give you... And
I have to go.
Oh, that was you, Andrew. Okay. Well, the point still stands. that Andrew has to leave in a few minutes, and I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions to Andrew while he's still here. So I know there's a lot of you, and I suspect there's going to be many questions, so I'm going to be taking them by batches. Well, I can see three there. So if you could please introduce yourself before you ask the question, and then ask your question. The gentleman right there.
My name is Andrew Brooke from the Association of Foreign Banks. I'd be interested in the panelists' views about the decision of the last government to have low-risk, politically exposed persons for the UK and for enhanced due diligence outside the UK. What are your thoughts on that decision by the last government?
And then the gentleman behind him.
Yeah, my name is Sushil and I'm a chartered accountant. Now, we talk about China, Pakistan, all these countries. We don't give resources to even crime stoppers. You write to them, they don't have time to reply you, they don't pick up your call. This is a real situation. You know, somebody scam you, they are still scamming you. We don't have resources.
Blimey. They're trying to stop him. They're trying to stop him from telling the truth.
They are still scamming us, but there is no one. Police don't take this call seriously. And who's going to take it? Forget about Pakistan, China, they are big things. Local happening.
Yeah, thank you.
You want to go for holidays, they're taking your money. And they're taking still money. This is the situation.
Okay, thank you. And yes, just a lady next to you.
Hi, Rachel Davis, Transparency International. So the National Crime Agency recently secured the forfeiture of millions of pounds of UK property that was linked to a politically connected person in Azerbaijan. This is unusual. Here we see lots of money, suspicious funds, unfortunately come from that country into our property. There have also been questions around political donations. So my question to the panel is, first of all, that money's been seized. Where should it go next? What should happen to it? And secondly, how can political parties protect themselves from being tarnished with their fees?
Do you want to
Thank you very much.
Do you want to ask anything for me before I go?
Well, Andrew, would you like to answer any of those questions?
Well, I'm very sorry I've got to rush off, but you'll forgive me. All those questions really, apart from possibly the last one, border on the issue of how you make the system work better. And the truth is that, as I set out, whereas the baddies have the best tunes and the money, the system also operates with one hand behind its back. For example, the National Crime Agency, we've already heard that amazing statistic about how you bring the wages up to something as simple as that, up to the level of the police, but also the prosecuting authorities. They have a budget. They see the weight of money against them. They have their budget. Do they put all their efforts into one case? Do they do a whole series of cases? It's an inequality, and it's about how you make the system work better. I've never forgotten the story I was told. It's about how difficult this stuff is. That a New York lawyer was invited to go to a conference in Pakistan to talk about dirty money and how the law could be used to attack it. And he went to this conference, and in the front row, as he was speaking about the ways in which you could do this, he noticed there were a number of people with very large Rolex watches, and he suddenly realized, to his horror, that although there were some very good, law and order people there were also people who were specifically attending his lecture in order to learn from where the attack would come, so that they could then make sure that they were in a position to prevent it. So, it is extremely difficult. The weight of money, expertise, which is why I say how you know your client and hold the enablers to account is it's a human rights issue as well as everything else, but it's a really, really difficult issue. But these are the issues you have to address if you're to make the system work better. And in terms of your point you made about parties protecting themselves, because that is an area of great transparency. We've seen with all these clothes that sort of senior Labour politicians apparently can't buy their own glasses and trousers. There is so much transparency thanks to a free media on that I think that's a slightly different issue. I'm not saying we should be complacent about it, and I'm not saying that there isn't more to be done. But I think that is a different issue compared with what I've been talking about, where the weight of advantage is not with the law and order authorities. I don't know whether David would agree with.
I was just thinking how well dressed you look.
As a matter of fact, I'm delighted to say I looked this morning that this suit was made 34 years ago.
Oh, I thought thought it was Marks and Spencer.
I'm gonna have to go.
Let me just pick up on the balance of power. Oh, well, two things. Firstly, I think the politically exposed person thing was clumsy and silly, frankly, the way it was constructed. The first instance. But secondly, on this issue of balance of power, this whole problem doesn't just cause the problems we know of loss of taxes, crime, and so on. It also corrupts our entire system. So if your name was Catherine Belton, who wrote Putin's People, or Tom Burgess, or Norman Bullock, and so on, people who have actually exposed all this, you come under attack from these people. This is what slaps are about. They will sue you. Firstly, for defamation, and then, before that case is concluded, for privacy breaches, and before that's concluded, for data breaches. So before you get to court, you spend over £1 million. So if you're a normal person, you're broken. And that happens in Britain because it's easier for it to happen in Britain than anywhere else. That then leads to a whole industry setting up of lawyers who will support this. I won't name them in this place since we're being broadcast, but you'll find them easy enough if you look in Hansard. And those lawyers will use private detectives who use dubious techniques, and those private detectives will then use hacking firms based in India, and you end up being destroyed. And this system is being put in place off the back of all of the corruption and money laundering we're talking about here. It's absolutely turned London, not just into a money laundromat, but into a cesspit of bad legal practice.
Andrew, you have anything to add? You don't have to if you don't want to.
I could take Rachel's question about Azerbaijan. So I think in terms of what should happen to the money, part of it should go back to anti-corruption initiatives in or to do with Azerbaijan, and perhaps some of it should also go to the law enforcement agencies in the UK doing that important work, which as I've said out earlier, are underfunded. And then in terms of what political parties could do, I mean, currently they're extremely, and this is all political parties, are extremely vulnerable to receiving anonymous or dirty money. They don't have to check by law the source of the donations they receive, or the source of the donors' funds, which in every other industry, from banking to the legal sector to everywhere, you have to at least do a basic check, and you don't have to do that for political parties. And there are numerous other legal loopholes there. And finally, in terms of enforcement, we don't actually have currently. So some research Spotlight on Corruption has shown that there's no lead police force actually looking at this. It should really be the NCA, but they don't really have the capacity. So this is a really serious vulnerability in our politics that needs to be addressed.
Can I give my answer to the money issue? Sorry, I should have said. Some of it's a political decision, and so it goes to support Ukraine and so on, off the back of that, and I think you've got to accept that. But if I were the NCA, for example, I would publish alongside my annual account saying what I cost, what I got back for the state, and then use that as part of my bid to the Treasury, and put moral pressure on the Treasury to do something about it.
Perfect. Any more questions? Yeah, sir?
Most of cases in UK actually, when Anti-Money Laundering Act trigger and they start investigation, the crime has already started basically. And if you see there is a classic example in Bradford Jewelry Company, they deposited £265 million within 5 years and 700,000 in cash. How we can stop that the source, the beginning, where the money entering the system, rather than investigating after the crime has happened?
So how can you stop the source of dirty money?
I mean, it's a bit of the game of the cat and the mouse, isn't it? In any case, enforcement, it will always be a little bit reactive because crime, I mean, it's just very utopic to just think that crime is never going to happen anymore. What you can do, is do this with this thing that we call in compliance, is risk understanding. You have to accept that you're going to be exposed to a specific level of risk. London, we were talking about, one of the questions actually here was supposed to be, why is London such an attractive place? Well, it is a major financial centre, a big surprise. It's obviously going to be always attractive, but you can put in place things to slow down the process. How can you stop it at the source? Well, it's also, management of, or like matter of development. For instance, you can do support, as James said, anti-corruption organizations in the countries where this money is being stolen. There are multiple layers where you can work on. The problem is, if you look at the UK, you're still going to have all this infrastructure that allows the money to get in. If I see it, I'm sorry, if I were a criminal, if I were a criminal, I would still think that London is a lovely place, just because, as has been said, the enabling infrastructure is still too big. So you look at the root causes and you tackle the root causes through development aid, through, for instance, returning the proceeds of corruption. But at the same time, you have to stop what is happening here. And, going back to what we were talking about, resources and enforcement, yes, James pointed out that it's so much more lucrative to stay in the police force rather than going to the NCA. Think about how much you would make as a prosecutor if you were then to move on the other side. I know lots of lawyers that move from the SFO to big law firms because, let's face it, everybody has bills to pay and cost of living is a thing. So it's how do you make it attractive? It's a matter of enforcing on one side, so showing the stick, but also providing the incentives, investing in what we have here, which is currently not happening.
I think we have to recognise there's a limit to what you can do in somebody else's country, frankly. They've got to enforce their own laws. And if they don't, then maybe that it should alter the relationship with that state. We do some things. We can stop listing on the London Stock Exchange. We can stop matters being entered in the company's house, normally off the back of security arguments, I think. But you can make a security argument out of almost anything, particularly out of large-scale money laundering. One example where that failed, and this was during the Blair-Brown years, when actually this problem was actually the time when this problem really grew out of kilter, was all that money effectively stolen from the Russian people by these basically bogus, underpriced privatizations to friends of Putin and the like. That was latterly legalized by the Russian state, and we accepted that. We shouldn't have treated that as legal money, because the legalization was after the event and pretty obviously just a fix to support Putin's cronies. But we did accept it, and I go back to what I said right at the beginning. One of the villains in this is the Treasury, or in that case, Gordon Brown.
I agree with your point, basically. But if a professional, a solicitor or an accountant is involved in this process, he will end up in a prison, basically. But financial institutions, they can just get away by paying the fine. Like NetWest was fined £265 million. They just paid. But the people who oversee the whole operation, are they accountable in terms of criminal procedure or something?
I could take this one because, funnily enough, Spotlight on Corruption had a report on senior executive accountability out late last year, which found that when it comes to economic crime, there is very low accountability, as your question kind of points to. So we need to have a proper, we need to reflect properly. The government needs to reflect properly about how enforcement of senior executives can be increased. And we need a proper strategy to address this. But I think, it's a really good point.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to take one last round of questions. So this gentleman in the second row first.
Thank you. My name's Ray Thomas from Thomas Meyer as a cybersecurity fan. It's interesting, you all talked about enablers to some extent, and I think specifically law firms are obviously fundamentally part of this issue. And when you get down to kind of the level of individual lawyers, in the sort of private client area, they sort of talk about their risk appetite slightly euphemistically in terms of new business acceptance and who they take on and who they don't. And they know if they don't accept business, we can name again those firms who they know the same people will go to, and ultimately they will find a firm of lawyers who will represent them in London. So I suppose, how do you make sure these lawyers will work against their own commercial interests, if you like, as an industry? Because on the individual level, there's a level of amorality where they'll just.
I can only answer with respect to the slaps issue.
Before we answer, David, can we take a couple more
Oh
questions?
yeah, sure,
Just
of
to
course.
hurry
Beg
up.
your pardon. Yeah.
So the gentleman in the third row.
Thank you. Rob Merrick, a reporter for the Aid and Development website, DevEx. It's sometimes suggested that perhaps a reluctance in the UK to take action against dirty money in the overseas dependencies is because if their income fell, the cost of property then that would fall on the British state. I think I heard Andrew reject that argument, but can I ask the rest of the panel whether you agree that perhaps the obstructionists to tackling dirty money are not just in the overseas dependencies, but also in the Treasury, and might that include that in any advice you give to David Lammy if he's serious about tackling the issue?
Yeah. And I think the gentleman in the front row, and that will be the last question, I'm afraid.
So my question is that financial services play a very critical role in...
Who did, sorry?
Financial services play a crucial role in tackling dirty money. They're typically on the front line of it. As Andrew pointed out, these KYC requirements, overall the sector spends about 40 billion a year in total fighting economic crime. What does the panel believe should the future relationship between financial services as a sector and government and law enforcement, what should that relationship look like, for example, in terms of greater intelligence sharing and other mechanisms to bolster the policy that's going into tackling dirty money? And then sort of concurrently with that, what more can be done for other sectors and enablers such as, say, property, PR firms, etc., to actually get them to fully recognize their responsibilities, particularly where sanctions evasion is concerned?
Perfect. So the three questions in any order?
I can say the private sector one. I completely agree. I think that you have to bring financial services into the conversation. You look at the response, and it's a sort of triangle with public sector on the side, private sector on the other, hopefully civil society and academia just at the very top. Just because you need the data, which is what law enforcement very often lacks. You have to start from SARS, suspicious activity reports, for those who don't know what that means. So you need absolutely the participation of financial institutions. What I often hear, and I'm pretty sure that many potentially in the room who work in the sector talk about, is the cost of compliance. So we need to probably start a conversation about what kind of compliance we are requiring them. Are we asking them the right questions? Are we asking them the right data? What do we do with the money that we get from the economic crime levy, for instance? Are we using it as efficiently as we would love it to be? I think that those are the kind of questions that we should start asking right now, that the current government should start to consider. On the beyond the financial institutions, I think that probably one of the usual complaints that I hear is we're trying to apply some requirements that were drafted and crafted for financial institutions to businesses, to a sector that doesn't really follow that. I often do this with the art market, for instance, participants. They are my favorites. They say, we're so special. These kind of rules would not apply. Well, from one side, there needs to be a sort of attempt from government and the private sector, of course, civil service, to understand supervisors. They need to understand the supervised populations. But at the other hand of the spectrum, just get on with it, okay? It's been long enough for me to believe that you don't understand what compliance and anti-money laundering requirements are. It's crazy for me to see that last year HMRC has just given 2 fines, and those were because 2 market participant firms have failed to register, HMRC register, after a whole year extension had been given. I think that, this sort of a justification at this point, you can see it on my face if I think that you're saying something that it's a bit, just get on with it. It's fine. Obviously, we can find a way to come into the middle, but we have talked long enough. It's been 2.5 years that, illicit finance and sanctions and anti-money laundering have been in the conversations, and I know it because I've constantly spoken to the media and whatnot, so the public knows, sectors who know. Let's enforce it. So I would love to see a little bit more fines potentially at this point.
Okay, and I think we know what David's opinion is on the Treasury, but James, what would you say about the Treasury and the overseas dependencies?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I don't have any insight into the machinations of the Treasury. I wish I did. But I wouldn't be surprised. It is a vexed question, but I think Andrew's point was really valid, that, there are other ways of making money that aren't literally laundering the proceeds of crime from all sorts of illegal activities. I mean, it's a pretty low bar. Come on.
And you can't build national policy on an ethically flawed foundation, really. Then, I mean, apart from anything else, it's dangerous from a security point of view. Can I just come back to your point on lawyers? During the SLAPS debates, and it's worth a read if you're interested in this area. It's worth a read because we name everybody. Under the absolute privilege of the House of Commons, we name all the villains, basically. But one of the things that did happen as a result of that was reference to the SRA. And for the first time, they started to take this seriously. So the Solicitor's Regulatory Authority is actually doing something about it for a start. And that's just on the SLAP side. I've got nothing else. And the gentleman here who asked about financial services, I'm loath to give the state too much rights to sort of intrude in private information, and financial information is very often private. I tend to make the onus much more on the organisations themselves. So if they get caught, they get sort of fatal consequences, financially fatal, not otherwise, financially fatal consequences. But I would be a bit wary of giving the state too much right of access without some judicial authorisation anyway. But I will say this, you know, I'm not a great fan of the American judicial system, but it's much more effective than we are at catching banks when they're money laundering. I won't cite the examples again as I'm on camera.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And this is all we have time for tonight. Well, not tonight, but for this event. And I want to thank all the panelists for speaking, including Andrew, who is not here. And I want to thank the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition as well for partnering with us on this event. If you are interested in becoming a member of Bright Blue, in which case you get access to all of our events, all of our publications, you can sign up by speaking to me or any of the other members of the team who will be wearing blue lanyards. It costs £20 unless you're a student, in which case it costs £10. And our next event is going to take place in this room as well. If you're interested in it, you can find out all about it in one of those fringe guides, which are peppered around the room. So please pick those up and please come to more of our events. And thank you very much for coming.